The desert wind howled through Copper Ridge like a banshee's wail, carrying with it the scent of sage and copper dust that had become as familiar to Sheriff Samuel Mackenzie as his own breathing. From his office window, Sam watched the sun sink behind the jagged peaks of the Sierra Nevada, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson that reminded him why he'd never left this godforsaken corner of Nevada. At 38, Sam had been the law in Copper Ridge for nearly a decade, watching the town grow from a handful of prospectors' tents to a thriving community of 800 souls, all drawn by the rich copper veins that snaked through the surrounding hills like golden arteries. The Consolidated Copper Company had built everything: the company store, the boarding houses, even the church where Reverend Hayes preached about salvation while the mine whistles counted the hours of their lives. Sheriff Mackenzie. The voice of young Billy Patterson cut through the evening quiet as the boy burst through the office door, his freckled face flushed with excitement. "There's trouble down at Murphy's saloon. Some strangers stirring up a real ruckus." Sam reached for his gun belt, the familiar weight of his Colt .45 settling against his hip like an old friend. "What kind of trouble, Billy?" "He's asking questions about the mine, about folks getting sick." Murphy tried to cut him off, but the man won't. "Listen, says he's got important business with the whole town." The walk to Murphy's saloon took Sam through the heart of Copper Ridge's main street, past the general store where Martha Chun swept her porch despite the gathering dusk, past the barber shop where old Pete Kowalski still worked by lamplight, and past the rows of modest homes where families gathered for supper. It was a scene of American frontier prosperity, built on copper and dreams. Murphy's saloon buzzed with tension when Sam pushed through the batwing doors. The usual crowd of miners, merchants, and travelers had formed a loose circle around a tall, lean stranger who stood near the bar with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hostile audiences. He wore a dusty black coat and hat, and his weathered face suggested a man who'd seen both sides of 40 and wasn't impressed by either. "Gentlemen," the stranger was saying, his voice carrying a slight southern accent, "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to prevent it. My name is Elias Crowley, and I've come from Denver with information that concerns every soul in this town." "Information about what?" demanded Murphy, a burly Irishman whose red face matched his temper. "About why your children have been falling sick, about why the creek water tastes like metal, about why the Consolidated Copper Company is so eager to keep certain reports from reaching federal inspectors." The saloon fell silent except for the ticking of Murphy's grandfather clock. Sam felt the familiar tightening in his chest that preceded trouble, the same feeling he'd had before the range war of '82, before the claim jumpers tried to take over the Morrison spread. "Sheriff Mackenzie," Crowley said, noticing Sam's arrival. "I was hoping to speak with you. There are things about this town that need saying." "Then you can say them in my office," Sam replied, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. "After you explain what gives you the right to come into our town, making accusations." Crowley's smile was grim. "The right of a man who's seen what happens when good people trust the wrong company. The right of someone who's watched entire communities disappear when they get too close to inconvenient truths." "That's enough," Sam said firmly. "You're coming with me now." As he escorted Crowley toward the door, Sam caught fragments of worried conversation from the assembled crowd. The stranger's words had struck a nerve. There had been more sickness lately, particularly among the children. Young Emma Rodriguez had been bedridden for weeks with a strange wasting illness, and the creek that fed the town's water supply had indeed taken on an odd metallic taste. The jail cell in Copper Ridge was built solid iron bars set in granite blocks, designed to hold everything from drunk miners to claim jumpers. As Sam locked Crowley inside, the stranger's gray eyes held no fear, only a weary resignation that suggested he'd been in similar situations before. "You're making a mistake, Sheriff," Crowley said quietly. Every hour you keep me locked up is another hour those people out there remain in danger. Danger from what? You haven't told me anything. Except wild claims about the mining company. Crowley reached slowly into his coat, producing a leather portfolio despite Sam's watchful gaze. Arsenic, he said simply. In the water supply. The Consolidated Copper Company's new extraction process uses arsenic compounds to separate ore from rock. They've been dumping the tailings directly into Willow Creek, upstream from your town's water intake. The words hit Sam like a physical blow. Willow Creek fed the town's main well, the source of water for 800 people. That's a serious accusation. You have proof? Sam examined the documents by lamplight water samples showing arsenic. Levels far above safe limits. Internal memos discussing acceptable losses and community management strategies. Correspondence between company officials revealing a pattern of deliberate concealment. The technical language was difficult to parse, but the implications gradually became terrifyingly clear. Why bring this to me? Sam asked. Why not take it directly to federal authorities? Because federal authorities move slow, and your people don't have time. Because I've seen what happens to towns that wait for government help. Crowley's voice carried the weight of personal experience. 3 years ago, I tried to warn the folks in Silver Creek, Colorado. Company threatened my job, my family. By the time federal inspectors arrived, half the children were dead or dying, and the other half had mysterious accidents that silenced them permanently. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the night air, not the casual clip-clop of a late traveler, but the urgent rhythm of riders in a hurry. Sam moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains to see 3 men on horseback. Stopping outside the Consolidated Company office. They're here sooner than I expected, Crowley said grimly. Sheriff, you need to understand these men aren't just business executives. They're the kind who've made entire communities disappear. Before. Sheriff Mackenzie opened the door to find Harrison Blake flanked by 2 men. Sam didn't recognize hard-faced individuals whose bulges under their jackets suggested they weren't carrying mining equipment. Blake's usually immaculate appearance showed signs of hasty travel, dust on his expensive coat, sweat stains despite the cool night air. Sheriff Mackenzie, Blake said with forced cordiality. I understand you've detained one of our former employees. We'd like to speak with him about some missing company property. Mr. Crowley is being held on charges of disturbing the peace, Sam replied evenly. He'll see the judge in the morning like anyone else. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Blake's smile never reached his eyes. This is a matter of corporate security involving trade secrets. We have legal authority to take custody of Mr. Crowley immediately. Sam noticed how Blake's companions had positioned themselves to block his line of sight to the street, their hands resting casually near their weapons. I don't see any federal marshals or court orders. In Copper Ridge, I'm the legal authority. Sheriff, one of Blake's men spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the flat menace of a professional killer. You're interfering with matters beyond your jurisdiction. Step aside. The threat hung in the air like gun smoke. Sam felt the familiar calm that came before violence, his senses sharpening as he calculated angles and distances. 3 against 1, but he had cover and they were silhouetted against the doorway. Elias was right, came Crowley's voice from the cell. They can't let word get out about the poisoning. Too much money at stake. Blake's facade cracked slightly. Mr. Crowley has stolen confidential documents and is spreading false information designed to damage legitimate business operations. We're here to recover company property and prevent further harm to the community. Harm to the community? Sam laughed harshly. Like the harm of poisoning children with arsenic? Like the harm of letting families drink contaminated water while your company counts profits? You don't understand the situation, Sheriff. The mining operation employs most of this town. Without Consolidated Copper, Copper Ridge dies anyway. We're trying to find a solution that saves jobs and protects people. By covering up mass poisoning, Blake's patience finally snapped. By managing a transition that doesn't destroy 800 lives overnight. Yes, there were problems with the extraction process. Yes, some contamination occurred. But shutting down the mine immediately would be catastrophic for everyone involved. So your solution is to make the whole town disappear? The words slipped out before Sam could stop them, revealing that he'd understood more of Crowley's warnings than he'd intended to admit. Blake's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I think," Blake said slowly, "that you've been listening to too many conspiracy theories, Sheriff. Perhaps it's time for new leadership in Copper Ridge. Someone who understands the delicate balance between idealism and pragmatism." The threat was unmistakable now. Sam's hand moved closer to his gun, but Blake's men were professionals who'd read the same signals. The situation balanced on a knife's edge. "There's another option," Crowley called from his cell. "Tell them about the federal investigators, Sheriff." Sam caught the prompt, understanding immediately. That's right. Federal mining inspectors are due here next week. Already telegraphed to expect them. If anything happens to Mr. Crowley or to me, they'll know exactly where to start looking. It was a bluff, but Blake couldn't be sure. The regional director's face went through several calculations before settling on frustrated anger. "You're making a terrible mistake, Mackenzie. Copper Ridge is a company town. The company decides what's best for the community, not some cowboy with a badge. Then maybe it's time Copper Ridge stopped being a company town." Blake signaled to his men, and they began backing toward the door. "You have until tomorrow night, Sheriff. After that, the situation will be handled through different channels. I'd advise you to consider what's best for everyone involved." After they left, Sam released Crowley from the cell. The two men stood in the lamplight, both understanding that the real confrontation was just beginning. "They'll be back," Crowley sighed quietly. "And next time, they won't bother with conversation. You need to warn the townspeople, Sheriff. Give them a chance to get their families to safety before Blake brings in professional muscle." Sam nodded, already formulating plans. The next few hours would determine whether Copper Ridge survived as a community or became another ghost town in the Nevada desert. But this time, the ghosts would be real, and their deaths would be on his conscience if he failed to act. "Tell me everything," Sam said. "About Silver Creek, about how they make towns disappear, about what it takes to stop them." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and carrying with it the acrid smell of the copper mine. But for the first time in months, Sheriff Samuel Mackenzie felt like he had a clear enemy to fight and good reason to fight them. The question was whether he could protect 800 innocent people from a corporation that had already proven it would kill to protect its secrets. The clock on his desk ticked toward midnight, marking the beginning of what might be Copper Ridge's final day as a living town. Dawn broke gray and sullen over Copper Ridge, the usual bustle of morning routines replaced by an eerie quiet that made Sheriff Mackenzie's skin crawl. From his office window, Sam watched his family's loaded possessions into wagons with the desperate efficiency of people fleeing a fire. The word had spread through the night like wildfire arsenic in the water. Company threats, children in danger. "Martha Chun closed the general store an hour ago," Crowley reported, returning from his reconnaissance of the town. The Rodriguez family left before sunrise. Even old Pete Kowalski packed up his barbershop and headed for his brother's place in Carson City. Sam poured another cup of the bitter coffee that had become his fuel for the past 18 hours. "How many are left?" "Maybe 60 people. Mostly the ones with too much invested to abandon overnight. Murphy's still running the saloon. Doc Henderson won't leave her patients, and a few of the single miners are staying because they don't have anywhere else to go." The exodus had begun just after midnight, triggered by Sam's decision to trust the people of Copper Ridge with the truth. He'd walked from house to house with Crowley's documents, explaining the water contamination, the company's cover-up, and the implied threats to anyone who might testify. The response had been swift and unanimous: get the children to safety, whatever the cost. I didn't expect them to leave so fast, Sam admitted, watching the Carson family's wagon disappear around the bend toward the main road. 24 hours ago, this was a thriving town. Fear is a powerful motivator, Crowley replied. These people have seen what happened to mining towns before boom to bust overnight, families scattered to the wind. Better to control their own exodus than wait for the company to control it for them. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Sam opened it to find Dr. Eleanor Henderson, her medical bag in one hand and a carpet bag in the other. At 52, Doc Henderson had delivered half the babies in Copper Ridge and buried a quarter of the town's dead. Her decision to stay or go would influence many others. "Sheriff," she said without preamble, "I need to examine those water samples Mr. Crowley brought. If we're going to make accusations about arsenic poisoning, I want medical evidence to back them up." Sam led her to the table where Crowley had spread his documentation. Doc Henderson studied the chemical analysis reports with the focused intensity of someone who'd spent decades translating scientific data into human terms. "These levels would cause chronic poisoning," she said finally. "Headaches, fatigue, stomach problems, skin lesions. In children, it could cause developmental problems, learning difficulties." She trailed off, her face paling. "Emma Rodriguez. The Patterson boys' constant stomach aches. Mrs. Kim's skin rash that wouldn't heal." "How many others?" Sam asked. "Half the town, probably. Symptoms develop slowly, and we've been attributing them to other causes. The mine dust, the altitude. Normal childhood illnesses." Doc Henderson's professional composure cracked slightly. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. How long has this been going on?" Crowley consulted his documents. Based on the company's internal reports, the new extraction process began 18 months ago. The contamination would have started almost immediately. Doc Henderson sank into a chair, the full weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. 18 months. Children drinking poison for 18 months while I treated symptoms and told their parents not to worry. "You couldn't have known," Sam said gently. "The company made sure of that, but I should have suspected. The pattern of illnesses, the way they didn't respond to normal treatments." She looked up at Sam with haunted eyes. "What do we do now? The families with sick children have fled, but what about treatment? What about the people who are too poor or too stubborn to leave?" Before Sam could answer, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the morning air. But these weren't the measured hoofbeats of fleeing families. This was the rhythmic thunder of riders in formation, moving with military precision. Sam moved to the window and cursed under his breath. A column of 20 mounted men was approaching the town center, led by Harrison Blake and flanked by individuals who looked more like mercenaries than miners. Each rider carried rifle and sidearm with the casual competence of men accustomed to violence. "Pinkertons," Crowley said grimly, recognizing the type if not the specific individuals. Blake called in professional muscle. "They're here to restore order and protect company property." Doc Henderson gathered her papers with shaking hands. "I need to get word to the territorial authorities, to someone who can—" "There's no time," Sam interrupted. "And no guarantee that territorial authorities aren't already in the company's pocket. We're on our own." The column halted in front of the jail, Blake dismounting with theatrical precision. His expensive suit had been replaced with practical riding clothes, and the bulge under his jacket was no longer concealed. This was Blake without pretense, a corporate executive prepared for war. "Sheriff Mackenzie," Blake called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I believe we have some business to conclude." Sam checked his weapons, the Colt .45 on his hip, the Winchester rifle behind his desk, the spare ammunition in his desk drawer. 20-1 odds weren't impossible, but they weren't encouraging either. "What's your play, Sheriff?" Crowley asked quietly. Sam looked out at the nearly empty streets of Copper Ridge, at the abandoned buildings that had housed 800 souls just hours before, at the few remaining residents who'd chosen to trust his protection over flight. Murphy had emerged from his saloon. Doc Henderson stood resolute beside her clinic, and a handful of miners clustered near the company office, perhaps 60 people in total, all that remained of what had been a thriving community. "Same as always," he replied, opening the door to face whatever came next. "Uphold the law and protect the people, even if there's only 60 of them left." The confrontation that would determine the fate of Copper Ridge took place not in a dramatic shootout, but in the dusty main street under the harsh Nevada sun, with words as weapons and truth as ammunition. Sheriff Mackenzie stepped out of his office to find Harrison Blake's hired guns positioned strategically throughout the town on rooftops, behind wagons, covering every angle of approach or escape. "Sheriff," Blake began, his voice carrying the confident tone of a man who believed victory was assured. "I'm here to restore order to Copper Ridge and protect legitimate business interests. Stand aside and no one gets hurt." "Whose definition of order?" Sam replied, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. "Yours or the law's?" Blake smiled coldly. "Sometimes they're the same thing. This town exists because of Consolidated Copper. The mine provides jobs, housing, everything these people need to survive. Without the company, Copper Ridge is just another pile of rocks in the desert. Maybe that's better than being a pile of poisoned rocks." The words carried across the empty street, reaching the few remaining residents who watched from windows and doorways. Murphy had emerged from his saloon, Doc Henderson stood in front of her clinic, and a handful of miners clustered near the company office, perhaps 60 people in total, all that remained of what had been a thriving community. "You've destroyed this town, Mackenzie," Blake continued. "Spread panic based on false information, driven away families, ruined livelihoods. These people trusted you to protect them, and you've betrayed that trust. By telling them the truth about poisoned water, by believing the lies of a disgruntled former employee." Blake gestured toward Crowley, who had positioned himself near the jail entrance. "Elias Crowley was fired for incompetence and insubordination. His evidence is fabricated revenge against the company that exposed his failures." "It was a masterful performance," Sam admitted privately. Blake had taken the initiative, controlling the narrative and putting the defenders on the defensive. But the regional director had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed the remaining residents were here because they couldn't leave, rather than because they'd chosen to stay. "Mr. Blake," came a voice from the saloon porch. Murphy stepped forward, his Irish accent thick with emotion. "My daughter Katie was one of the sick children. Been poorly for months, losing weight, couldn't keep food down. Doc Henderson here couldn't figure out what was wrong." Doc Henderson joined Murphy in the street, her medical bag held prominently. "I've examined the water samples Mr. Crowley provided. The arsenic levels are consistent with the symptoms I've been treating for months. This isn't fabricated evidence, it's medical fact." Blake's confidence wavered slightly. "Dr. Henderson, you're a skilled physician, but water chemistry isn't your specialty. These tests could have been contaminated, manipulated. Then let's have them verified by federal authorities," Sam interrupted. "If Mr. Crowley's evidence is false, an independent investigation will prove it. If it's true, the people responsible for poisoning children should face justice." "There's no time for lengthy investigations," Blake snapped, his composure finally cracking. "This situation needs to be resolved immediately before more damage is done to the regional economy." The mask was off now. And the real Harrison Blake stood revealed, not a corporate executive concerned about jobs and communities, but a man whose primary interest was protecting profit margins and avoiding accountability. The remaining residents could see the difference, and their mood shifted accordingly. "What kind of resolution did you have in mind?" Sam asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Blake signaled to his men, who began closing their circle around the town center. Consolidated Copper is prepared to offer generous compensation, packages to all remaining residents, transportation to new locations, assistance finding employment, financial support during the transition. Everyone wins. "And if we refuse?" Murphy asked. Blake's smile returned, but now it carried the cold promise of violence. "Then you'll be removed as trespassers on company property. This entire town exists on land leased from Consolidated Copper. That lease can be terminated immediately if necessary." Sam felt the familiar calm that preceded decisive action. 20 armed men against 60 civilians and one sheriff. The odds were overwhelming, but the moral equation was crystal clear. Blake was counting on intimidation to avoid the messy business of mass murder, but his willingness to threaten an entire community revealed the depths to which corporate power could sink. "There's another option," Sam said quietly. "You and your men leave Copper Ridge immediately. The remaining residents decide for themselves whether to stay or go, without threats or coercion. Federal authorities investigate the water contamination claims through proper legal channels." Blake laughed harshly. "You're outnumbered 20-1, Sheriff. What makes you think you can dictate terms?" Sam's answer came not in words, but in the metallic clicks of gun hammers being cocked throughout the town. Murphy had produced a shotgun from behind his bar. Doc Henderson held an Army Colt with the competence of someone who'd served in frontier hospitals. The miners emerged from cover carrying rifles and pistols, their faces set with the determination of men defending their homes. "Because," Sam said calmly, "you're not facing one sheriff. You're facing a community that's decided to stand together." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, 60 determined residents facing 20 professional gunmen in the empty streets of a dying town. Blake's eyes darted from face to face, calculating odds and alternatives, weighing profit against bloodshed. Finally, he raised his hand, signaling his men to lower their weapons. "This isn't over, Mackenzie. Consolidated Copper has resources you can't imagine, influence that reaches from San Francisco to Washington. You've won a battle, not the war." "Maybe," Sam replied. "But sometimes one battle is enough." As Blake and his hired guns rode out of Copper Ridge, the remaining residents gathered in the street to discuss their future. Some would leave, seeking fresh starts in communities untainted by corporate poison. Others would stay, determined to rebuild their town on terms they chose themselves. Sheriff Samuel Mackenzie stood watch as the sun set behind the mountains, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges. Federal investigators would eventually arrive, drawn by the evidence Crowley had provided and the testimony of survivors. The Consolidated Copper Company would face justice, though it might take years to fully unravel their crimes. But for the first time in months, Sam felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope that justice and community could still triumph over greed and power, even in the harshest corners of the American frontier. The town of Copper Ridge would never be the same, but it would survive, rebuilt by people who'd learned the true cost of trusting others to decide their fate. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the desert, carrying news of their victory to the outside world and bringing the promise of a future where corporate power could no longer silence entire communities with threats and violence.